Hello, my beautiful cuddlebugs. Welcome to Ramblings of a Book Dragon, where we dive into the warmth of good books and unravel stories that feel like a literary hug. I'm Allie, your host, and I'm thrilled to embark on another cozy adventure with you. So grab a cup of your favorite beverage, snuggle into your cozy reading nook, and let's begin with today's episode. I thought I would continue with the Wolfton trilogy by Elodie Harper, and today we're going to continue with the Golden Door and the Temple of Fortuna. Hopefully, otherwise I will be just doing the Golden Door, and then the next episode will be the Temple of Fortuna. Let's see how I do with my ramblings today. We had left off with what was going on at the end of the Wolfton, and it's about a year later. In about 75 AD, or a few months after the events of the Wolfden, with Amara firmly in place in the house with a golden door. And it's called that because of how bright and shiny the door is with the brass plating, the gold plating. Rufus bought this specifically for her, and he's placed several of his slaves in the house with her to kind of take care of her, and also to kind of keep an eye on her, make sure that everything is okay there. She is now officially a courtesan, a freed woman, and Rufus is now her patron. She is also making new friends, as continuing with some of her old friendships, along with the owner of a very famous bathhouse for the wealthy woman named Julia, who likes her a lot, and another courtesan named Drusilla, who's very wealthy. We met her in the first book, but Julia was actually a real woman. She appeared to be either a businesswoman in her own right as a single woman, or perhaps she was making decisions for her husband. But either way, she was doing things on her own. I believe it turned out that she had actually convinced Pompey to give her this really big piece of property land to turn into her home, as well as the bathhouse and apartments. Like, she was a business tycoon. She became good friends with Amara and kind of was also introducing her to various important people, including someone that may or may not be helping her later on. We will see what happens. But yes, now while I continue to like Amara's ruthlessness, it seemed almost kind of like the fact that she was freed kind of went to her head a little bit, and maybe she was thinking that she could kind of control Rufus a little, because she went a little, like, I understand what the author was doing. I understand the thought process. There were several times where I wanted to just smack her silly, because some of her decisions were just very, I understand what was going on, because she would have done this for Dido. She would have done exactly what she's about to do for Dido, because she was promising her that she was going to free her as soon as she could. Now that Dido's dead, and in the Wolfden, there is a scene where they're going into the cemetery. They get attacked by this man who was actually one of the enemy pimp's henchmen. This was all during the beginnings of the potential gang war that was going on after the enemy pimp was killed in a fire, and he was wanting to kind of do an eye for an eye situation. Victoria had actually wound up killing the man instead and saving Amara's life, so now Amara owes her a life debt. And because of this, and because now Dido's dead, Amara's like, well, I have to save Victoria. I have to free her. One of the slaves that is kind of like one of the ones that's Rufus's right-hand slave. He oversees Rufus's family jewelry business and all these other things, and also kind of the runnings of the house. He was telling Amara, when she heard about kind of what was going on at the Wolfden, that Felix was being very just a bad man, as per usual, but he had ramped it up a notch because he had lost Amara. He was just being extremely mean to the other girls. So I need to save Victoria, because Victoria, she is Felix's favorite, and Victoria is absolutely in love with him. And I felt so sorry for Victoria, but like, she was just absolutely in love with him. But Victoria can't seem to see past the way he is with her in private. Like, he seems to say all the right sweet words. Amara, instead of talking to Rufus or doing anything that could potentially be semi-logical. She goes straight to Felix and wants to buy Victoria. There is another woman that is there. They name her Britannica because she is a red-haired woman from Britain. She is a fighter. In the Wolf Den, Amara's like, she's going to die here. She is not a prostitute. Like, she doesn't speak the language. This was a very bad business transaction. I will take her as well. Like, so she's buying Victoria and Britannica. Felix is just like, okay, I will sell them both for X amount, an extremely expensive amount, way more than he ever bought Victoria for. And so way more than what Amara's highest amount was going to be anyway. And so she tries to talk him down a little bit, and she does, but it's still more than what she was able or willing to pay, but she still agrees. It's just like, girl, why? It's only been a few months. She thought that Rufus would be okay with this situation. And it's just like, I understand the why, that wanting to free and needing to pay back that life debt and hearing about what's going on and that helplessness and that desire to help, and that she puts herself right back into Felix's path, and now she's in his debt again, and now she has to go deliver payments, but at least now she's still doing her business from before but now she's able to do this kind of more on her own with the money lending. So she's still doing that, and she's able to continue to do that. She's doing that, plus she's selling Victoria as with kind of doing the same thing that she and Dido were doing. Her new friends Drusilla, to kind of explain what was going on, they agreed to buy a couple of other girls because that was the original plan anyway, was for them to buy 2 slaves to play flutes, and as kind of ways to kind of make some money while because Amara is supposed to learn how to play the harp, and she's learning it from Drusilla. And so when Rufus learns about what Amara did, he is furious. He is extremely mad, and slowly but surely throughout the course of the book, the lens of what she thought she knew about Rufus was slowly starting to lift. She learns what kind of man he is, and like he makes comments about her weight, that he prefers her to be really almost sickly skinny, like he was concerned that she was gaining weight, but he liked it more when she was extremely skinny, from when she was only able to really eat 1 meal a day from the time before. And then there was also this kind of duology in his head where he knew that she was a sex worker, but when he got mad when he knew that, but he thought that she was kind of above that. He thought that they were in this play. It was very weird, this kind of idea of this kind of idea, and that was kind of going on in his head throughout the book. And then one of the other things that was really just, I'm glad that she found love, but the way it happened was very annoying because she had to fall in love with Felix, a slave, but I understand why. He's a very good man. He's very sweet. So they begin an affair, even though they both know that if Rufus were to find out about this affair, he would kill them both. It would ruin them. And it turns out that Rufus added this clause into the contract that if Amara ever cheated on Rufus, then she would immediately lose her rights as a freed woman. She would become a slave again. And it sounded like this may be something that happened sometimes way back when with these freed women and patrons. These women, they had very short lifespans as courtesans. They needed to make as much money as possible. But of course, these men, they didn't want the women to go around being with other men. And it was really interesting because there was this scene where Amara and Rufus were out at Drusilla's home, and there was a couple of Drusilla's friends and patrons, and one of the patrons got really jealous because he thought that one of the other potential patrons, someone that was a friend, was making signs, and the patron, the official patron, was getting upset and jealous because he thought that this other guy was trying to kind of get in with Drusilla, but there was these other slave girls that were there as to help entertain champagne, and he was going to have sex with one of the other girls anyway. And it was just a very interesting evening. And I remembered hearing in a podcast episode, like stuff like that would happen, where like these women, they had to be very careful with how they managed the men because it was very dangerous for them. But they had to make as much money as possible because these men were looking for bright young things. Like, they didn't want women who were old at all. Like, of course not. How dare they age? But like, that was one of the things that was an issue, was if they got too old. And by then, so like, they either had to get married, which was what Drusilla was able to do. She found a new guy, a new patron, and she also has a son that she has to think of as well. So she had to find a man who would raise her son with her, who would accept her son and also marry her, which is what she's able to do. And he accepts her son and adopts him, which is fantastic for her. Like, she becomes a respectable woman in society, no longer just a courtesan. And so Amara, she's needing to figure this out for herself as well. And like, everyone else kind of knows that Rufus is just kind of an idiot anyway. And it's really funny because Julia, she's trying to introduce Amara to some other men as well, including Demetrius, who becomes her next patron in the third and final book, because Rufus winds up getting married to a young woman from a wealthy family. And so he's like, I can't do this with you anymore. And unfortunately in the book, luckily, no one ever discovers that Amara and Felix ever get married. Rufus doesn't discover this, but Victoria is an idiot. We love her, but she goes back to and she spills all the beans, including the fact that Amara and Philos are having an affair. So Felix decides to actually blackmail Amara, and so he's like, I want you to pay me this amount. And then when it turns out that Amara is pregnant, he's like, oh, well, if Rufus finds out that you're having sex with a slave and it's the slave is the father, then all y'all are going into slavery, and that child is going into slavery. But everyone thinks that the baby is actually Rufus's, and Rufus does sort of acknowledge the baby, but not really. And so then he's like, you can no longer stay in this house, you need to go somewhere else. And so that's that fun bit as well. With all that, it's just a whole great big mess, because now like there's this added stress of this affair and needing to just also keep the cockroach from cockroaching, and it's just very irritating. And the thing that kind of bothered me with the whole thing with Amara and Felix is that she was also she was goading him throughout the book, kind of like showing like, hey, we could have made a lot of money together if you had actually just listened to me. I am a doctor's daughter, I am intelligent, see what I am doing, see how much money I am making on my own without you. And she was trying to kind of see what was going on. Like, she was playing this cat and mouse game with Felix, and then Felix was also kind of doing this with her as well. And it was just like, why? And then like, he threatens to assault her, and luckily she was able to, like, he says something and it just completely drives her mental, and she starts throwing things at him, luckily. So it kind of stops him from doing that, but it was just very intense, very scary moment. But luckily she's able to get away, and unfortunately she still has to continue to pay money to Felix, about not only just with blackmail money in general, but she also does go to she's able to get some money, the rest of the money that she owes him from Drusilla, and that's how we find out about her getting married. She's like, I need to borrow money to pay him back, to just get to end this with him. And so she's like, yeah, I'll give you the money, but you can't ask me for anything else while you owe me this money. But which is good, but now she also has to pay him this other money as well. And so now that she is free and no longer has a patron, she goes to Demetrius, who is an older man and is a freedman himself, who had served the previous emperor before he died. He's like, hey, will you come with me to Rome? Will you be with me and be my courtesan? And she's like, yeah, I'll do that. But it's like she kind of goes back to that cold-heartedness. Like, it was tougher for her because she is in love with Philos, but she's like, I have to think of you. I have to think of what's going on with Felix, and I have to think of our daughter and keeping her safe and keeping her secure, because we find out that part of the issue of why she was sold into slavery was because her parents never saved up for her dowry. So that's a lot of it, is like, okay, she has a daughter now, so she has to save a dowry. And in order to do that, she has to have a patron. Like, love won't feed the bills. Love won't pay the bills. Love won't pay off a cockroach. So that is all that fun. But yeah, so we're slowly starting to build up to the finale, but yes, it's all very fun. And then we finally, like, the beginning of the third book, the Temple of Fortuna, is when we're in Rome, and I understand why she did this, and I think it was very interesting to see this, because she had started at the bottom, and now we're here at the top, as they say, and now she's at the very tippity top of power, where we see Queen Berenice as she is being exiled and is being sent back to Jerusalem, and it's all very interesting as well, with kind of seeing again, like, okay, even at this upper echelon level, there is still that level of fear. Like, there is still bad men. Like, she got very lucky with having Demetrius as her patron, but there are still men that are abusive. There are still men that are bad. Like, we see this with this other guy who, and his courtesan is like 17 years old, very pretty, and like she puts on this idea air of her not being the most intelligent, but then we find out that she is reasonably intelligent enough, but then she says too much and then she gets killed, and Amara's senses are going haywire when she says too much, and one of the slaves goes to warn him because Demetrius wants her to play kind of spy herself, and she starts to think that the other girl is being told to play spy to gather information on Demetrius, and it's just like all this court politics and Roman politics, and it's just all this craziness with that. And she's also having to deal with the stress of Felix still being there, and she had to leave behind her lover and child, and it's just a whole great big mess. But then it was very annoying because Demetrius, like, she tells Demetrius, like, hey, I had a really bad feeling about what was going on with this other guy because of my time working in the brothel. And he's like, oh, well, you shouldn't think like that anymore. You are now a courtesan. You are now you are a freed woman now. You shouldn't, because she left. Like, he was playing some sort of prank on her, and it was a very dangerous one. And he had basically sent her to leave, but she didn't have anything with her. She didn't have anyone to walk her home, so she had to walk home by herself because her spidey senses were going haywire, and she just saw him and saw the same kind of expression that was in some of the men that would come to the brothel, and so like the worst of the worst types that none of the girls wanted to be around. And Demetrius kind of just waved it off, but then they see that the girl was dead. She was killed, and it's just like, okay. And Demetrius is like, okay, I'm going to send you out of here for now. I'm going to send you back to Pompeii for the moment while he's going to figure out what's going on. And of course, this is the perfect time for an eruption. Like, she arrives like the day before the eruption. And so she's able to see her daughter because she was able to rent an apartment at Julia's, which is how she and Julia were able to become such great friends. And it wasn't a very good apartment, but it was was an apartment, and Demetrius didn't really want her to bring her daughter with her to Rome, but that was one of her big things to work on, is because Demetrius asked her to marry him. So she's like, yes, of course. And like that would be the best next step, because he realized that she needed protection. Like being his courtesan wasn't good enough. Like she needed to be his official wife, and that would be that excellent protection. But she also needs to convince him to accept her daughter, and he's wanting children of his own, and it's been like 3 years and they've had a couple of miscarriages. So it would have been interesting if they actually had children, if he would have accepted her daughter, but that's beside the point. And so she goes to Pompeii and she sees her daughter, and like she is absolutely attached to she is very much attached to her father Felix, even though she has no idea. She thinks that he's just a slave, because she was able to convince Rufus to kind of be there to help, to teach her daughter how basically how to be a Pompeian. And then there's Julia there as kind of like an aunt and everything, and she's just a lovely little thing. But then like she looks a lot like Philos, which is very interesting. But then like during this time, she's also amassed a couple of other things. Like she's amassed a little restaurant, and she has her own little gladiatorial group and everything. And so it's just been very interesting. She has done very well for herself with Pompeii. And there was one point actually in the House with the Golden Door where they were almost going to kill Felix, and that's Britannica almost killed him. Amara tells her don't, and Britannica's like, you need to do this or else he's not going to stop. But Amara's like, no, this is a bad plan. Like because they say that he says that like, this is in my will that you're having this affair, that this child is a child of a slave. Like it's just very messed up, the lengths that he was going, because he was like, you are always my slave, you are always going to be my slave, I am never letting you go. It's very disturbing and just gross, just creepy. And he, like I said, he's a cockroach. He never goes away. He never gives up. And so he's still there, and so she finally says enough is enough when there is an attack on one of her restaurants, and one of the gladiators' brothers gets like hit over the head and is dying. And so now at this point, it's not just Amara and her family that are involved in this. It's now this gladiator, and he is like, he's one of the ones that survived long enough to become a traitor. And so she's like, yes, do what you have to do. Take him out. And they've had all these rumblings. They've had a couple of earthquakes. And so we're slowly starting to build up the tension of the eruption of Vesuvius. And so we're slowly starting to build that up. And then, but I found really interesting is I was listening to the Ancient History of Fangirls podcast, and they did a kind of choose your own adventure of how to get out of Pompeii. And it was really interesting, like having listened to that podcast episode and then reading this book, because when the eruption happens, it's this whole great big, like no one really knows what's going on. No one had any idea that Vesuvius was even a volcano. And then they hear this eruption, they hear this really loud noise, and then they start to see fire and just all this stuff starting to happen. And it's like some people are, and so Amara at first she's like, let's go inside, because that's what Julia wants to do. She wants to stay inside, and Julia and her sister-in-law want to stay inside, and that's what she and the other slaves do. And Amara wants to do the same, because this seems like this is just not a good thing. We don't know what's going on out there. Hot, painful, let's just stay inside. And we see that in the podcast episode and this is what a lot of people did. Like, it's something that makes sense. But then Philos is all, hey, I saw this happen somewhere else, and we can't stay. We have to get out. And so it was interesting seeing that. And so then they grab their daughter and wrap her up with Philos. And so she starts to grab some things. She starts to grab, like she had bought some wedding shroud. She brought wedding cloth and some other things. And so she grabs that and grabs some jewels, like grabs things that are of value. And she hopes that she'll be able to come back after this is done once they get to safety. And so they go out down through the southern gate and out. And they actually go to Stabii, and that's where Pliny the Elder is, some of his friends and family. And so they actually stay in Stabii for the night because they're tired and they just want to rest, and they know Pliny, so it's like, okay, let's stay there. And like I was thinking in the book, like, no, don't stay in Stabii. That's a very bad idea. The eruption continued. Like that's where, like, it's not a good place to stay, but they stay. But luckily they continue on. Like in the morning they realize, okay, this was a bad idea, let's continue on. And they're forced to leave Pliny behind because of his asthma and his old age, and he's just left on the beach to die. And Amara felt very bad about this because he's her best friend. I mean, not best friend, but he's a good friend. He saved her life. He got her out of slavery. He saved her. And now she has to leave him to die. But he told her to leave, and so like she does. Like she has to save her and Velos and her daughter, who's like 3 or 4 at this time, his life. And so they continue on through the night. And there's this one moment that was kind of confusing to me because there was this heat, this moment of intense heat. And so it got me thinking, like, yeah, that makes sense that there would be heat, but how far away would you have to be to survive that kind of heat wave? Because you hear about that like in Pompeii, where there was the heat that was so intense, like it kind of just destroyed everything, like destroyed you before the actual what's it called but before everything else happened, that encased everyone. And it's just like, okay, well, it sounded like they were far enough away where it was like a heat situation, but it wasn't so hot that they were killed. Like they just stayed in place, like they sheltered in place until like the heat wave, whatever it was done, and then they continued on. And I really liked the way the author did this because she showed, okay, what was going on in Pompeii and the chaos and everything that was going on there, and the chaos and the fear and the not knowing what was going on. But then she also showed after of it, of them going to another town, and of them having to try to find shelter, and of them having to of these other towns and how they were handling this influx of people. And like some people were nice and other people were, of course, jacking up the prices of hotel rooms, but they were able to find a place to stay. And luckily she had brought her jewels with her. And so then they were finally able to take a boat back and first it was like, why would you want to go back? But it's like, well, no one had any idea of how bad it truly was. And so they wind up going, like, it takes them a while to be able to get back to Pompeii, but they're able to get on a boat and go back. And so then they wind up in these little tents, like little tent city basically. And so they have to give their names and everything. And it's just a great big mess. And they realize, oh crap, we lost everything. And so she's trying to figure out, like, is Julia still alive? Is anyone still alive? And she also has this fear of, is Felix still alive? Is like, who's going to see me that knows? Because she's been saying like, oh, me and Felix we're married. We're a married couple, in order to be able to stay together and be out and about and stuff. And when they've been away from outside of society. But it's like kind of having that kind of moment too, and that fear of, okay, if he's has to go back to being a slave, what's going to happen then? And like she could say, I am engaged to marry Demetrius. And he actually sent some people to look for her. And she had to make a choice. Like, and it was a really tough choice. Like, she could either go back to Rome and be with Demetrius and be his wife and live in a lap of luxury, or she could be with the man she loves and start a new life under new names. And she decides to be with the man that she loves. And it's like, oh, that's so sweet. So very sweet. And it's like, I understand. And I really like that there was that opportunity for her to be able to do that, that she was like, I felt really bad for Demetrius, but also he's an old man. It's okay. Like, it would have sucked. Like, it would have been fine. Like, she would have been just fine in Rome. Like, she was already just fine in Rome, and she lived that good life in Rome. But this was far better because they wound up back in Greece, and she was able to become the doctor that she always wanted to be. Well, they ran an apothecary shop. And I was wondering, like, okay, what happened to Felix? Did he die in Pompeii? And of course, like a freaking cockroach, he had to go and find her in Greece. And there he was as one of the ones that were looking for slaves. And he, like, what I really appreciated about before all this with the eruption is she told him, like, hey, you're just a small town pimp and you're talking like a small town pimp, because he was threatening, like, he just keeps on repeating himself again about threatening her and saying, hey, you're going to continue to pay me money. Like, he was basically just repeating himself over and over. And that's what happened now too, is he, like, I just rolled my eyes so hard when he was like, yeah, you're going to pay me money and you're going to become my whore again because you are my slave and you're always going to be my slave. You belong to me. You can either tell your husband, your slave lover, or not. It's up to you. But if you don't do this, then I'm going to tell the authorities, who will drag you back to Demetrius. It'll be interesting to see if he even takes you back after being known to be with a slave, or what's going to happen. But what I really liked is that Britannica was teaching Amara how to fight, how to use a knife, and before all of this was going on. And she's like, okay, let me think about this and I'll see you the next day. She doesn't even tell Philos what's going on. They're under new names now, but like they have a good life now. And plus she has her daughter to protect. She has her husband to protect. Like, she has this new life. And then plus also now, like, no one knows really who Felix is. Like, this is a whole new situation now, because now there's no longer a will. That will is buried in Pompeii. It probably doesn't even exist anymore. So I was kind of figuring out, like, there's only 20 pages left. Like, what's going to happen? Like, I was really hoping it was going to be a death scene, but I was really unsure, because it's like, wait, why are you agreeing to do this? But I understand why she did it, so that he wouldn't cause a scene, to keep him nice and calm. And she goes up with him and she starts to undress a little bit, and then she stabs him and kills him. It's like, yes, the cockroach is finally dead. She can finally be rid of him. And then we were wondering, like, is Britannica even still alive? Like, what's going on? Because they were all able to flee together, but then Britannica got separated because they were at a building and the building had collapsed, and they were like, okay, is Britannica even still alive? Like, what's going on? And she had actually become a gladiator, and before Pompeii had even erupted, we were actually able to see her big fight. And it's like, this is so cool. She's such a good fighter. I love her. She is a really good character. But then we get into the epilogue and we see that Britannica is alive. Yay! Like, it was very up in the air. Like, and that was the thing that, like, I can't even imagine how difficult and distressing that would be, to have no idea who lives, who dies, or anything like that. And Britannica has been traveling all over, and like, there was this point where she ran into Julia's sister-in-law, and she brings up Amara, and she's like, oh, well, Amara may no longer go by her name. Like, she may have changed her name because her sister-in-law saw Amara and Philos, and she put two and two together and realized, oh, they're together, they're lovers. But instead of turning them in, she was like, okay, I'll keep your secret. It's your secret safe with me, because her sister-in-law and Julia were lovers too. So Britannica is like, okay, I'm going to like continue to put my name up and say, like, I'm fighting and hoping that Amara will come to her. So like, it ends there before we get to the reunion, but we know, like, things are looking up for them. Like, we have that happy future, hopeful future, and it sounded like things are looking up for everyone. But yeah, that's the end of the story. That's the end of the trilogy, and please let me know what you would like for me to review next, and I will catch you next time. Goodbye.